11. "Are you sure you don't need my help?" Mabel asked, standing next to Archer at the edge of the Timberlake property later that afternoon. They stared up at the brown house as though it might turn into a bee monster, too. Archer shook his head. "I'm good. You have some unfinished business of your own." "Yeah," Mabel sighed. "I sure do." She turned and looked down the street at the red house with the yellow front door. Twyla's house. Mabel had told Archer she needed to go back to investigate and, hopefully, find a way to bring Twyla and her family back to the land of the living. "How are you going to get inside?" Archer asked. "I'm hoping the key is still hidden in a box on the front porch," Mabel said. "And if it isn't?" Mabel shrugged. "I'll figure something out." Then she punched Archer lightly on the bicep. "Good luck, champ." And Mabel walked away. Archer was left on his own to try to execute Fernanda's plan. It had sounded a lot easier when they had all been sitting around the lunch table daydreaming. He steeled himself, took one step after another, and made it to the front door. It was closed, but a soft turn of the knob revealed it to be unlocked. Archer gently pushed the door open. He listened for the sound of buzzing, flapping, stomping, or growling. He didn't hear a thing. The house was quiet. He bravely took a step inside. First things first, he needed plenty of escape routes for the bees. One by one, he opened all of the curtains, unlatched the locks, and cracked open all of the windows. He started out slowly, carefully taking soft steps, but as he went, he hastened. Eventually, he was running from room to room, bounding up the stairs to the second story, then scurrying back to the first level. He felt like a thief, trying to grab as much as he could before fleeing from the police. But to anyone who might be looking, he was just a kid letting in fresh air and sunshine. He left the front door standing partway open, then went through the kitchen to the back door. He left that door open too, clambered down the back steps, and approached a shed structure attached to the back of the house. Next, he needed to prep the smoker. A padlock had been looped through the shed latch, but it hadn't been fastened, so Archer was able to easily unhook it. He tossed it on the dusty ground. The doors to the shed creaked open. As light streamed in, Archer saw there was a small work table covered in everything he needed. A pair of yellow work gloves, a metal pail full of pine needles and dried grass clippings, a butane torch, and the steel smoker with a bellow that reminded Archer of his grandfather's accordion. Fernanda had explained how to light the smoker, but Archer had watched a couple of videos online just to be sure. He hoped it was as easy as the videos had made it seem. The smoker looked a little like a stainless steel coffee pot with a pointy nozzle at the top. The nozzle was attached with a hinge. Archer folded it back and looked inside the chamber. Fernanda had told him to be sure to take out any old ashes, since they might prevent a new fire. But when Archer removed the breather plate, there was nothing inside. Mr. Timberlake had cleaned it out after its last use. Archer stuffed a handful of the pine needles and grass clippings inside and used the butane torch to try to light them. He stuck the torch deep inside, turned it on, and watched the dry kindling instantly combust. Archer pressed the bellow on the side to push air into the bottom of the chamber. The oxygen fueled the flames, and they grew. Archer repeated the process, stuffing more kindling into the chamber and using the bellows to blow on the fire, until there was a steady stream of sweet-smelling smoke. Then he folded the nozzle back on its hinge. He pressed the bellow again. Smoke puffed out of the nozzle into a thin column. The smoker was ready. Now, he had to put on some protection. On the inside of one of the shed doors was a hook that held something long and white. Mr. Timberlake's beekeeping jumpsuit. It was one piece with long sleeves and long pants that had elastic at the wrists and ankles. Gloves and booties were attached with snaps. Archer unzipped the suit and climbed inside. Mr. Timberlake was a very tall man, much larger than Archer, and the suit reflected their size difference. Archer swam in the thing. It would be awkward to move around, he realized, but it was a necessary safety precaution. On a hook on the inside of the other door was the hood, with the dark mesh veil to protect his head and neck. It was far too large for Archer's head and made it difficult to see, but again, Archer didn't have a choice. He had to wear the thing, or risk getting stung on the face, or even end up with bees in his nose or ears. The mere thought of it scared him into submission. No quick movements of his head, he decided, or the thing might slide over his eyes or off his head entirely. He would have to work carefully. Time to go back inside and destroy the evil honey. Archer awkwardly picked up the smoker with a gloved hand and shuffled up the back porch steps into the house. A lovely cross breeze and streaming sunshine made the house seem less scary and emphasized how strangely Archer was acting. But Archer knew that the basement would not be so cheery. He needed to get in, do his business, and get out. He went straight for the tiny door under the stairs. Standing on the top step, Archer listened. The humming noise was so strong, it vibrated the step under his feet. Archer pushed the bellow on the smoker and watched the smoke fill the air. It slowly descended into the basement. But then, Archer realized that would only send the bees flying right at him, as the only escape route was behind him through the door. Like it or not, he needed to walk to the far side of the basement and smoke them out from there. Archer waited for the smoke to dissipate, then slid his feet down step by step. No sign of the Timberlakes, and there were only 2 jars of honey left on the shelves, surrounded by a sea of empty ones. Archer made this his primary focus. He crossed the packed dirt floor and picked up one of the jars. The glove was so awkward, he dropped the jar. It smashed on the ground below. It was what Archer had wanted, regardless. Archer used his gloved hand to slide the other jar to the edge of the shelf and let it fall naturally. It, too, burst, the green, glowing honey spreading out into a slowly growing puddle. Oddly, the floor soaked up the honey. That part of the mission was now accomplished. But the hardest part was yet to come. Archer needed to get rid of the bees. And then he needed to find Tyler and his dad and smoke them out too. A small window on the far side of the cellar beyond the stairs looked out into the side yard. The door to the staircase was open, but Archer didn't want to leave any exit closed. He began walking towards the window, intent to unlatch it before smoking the bees out, when he froze, in mortified fear. Under the stairs were 2 large, hulking figures with giant black orbs for eyes and golden fur covering them, head to toe. Very little of them was still human, save for their form. Arms and legs with compound joints moved them forward as their large, jagged mandibles clacked and pinched at the air. Could it be? Was that Tyler and his dad? As they emerged into the dim light from the window, nothing about them was recognizable. If he had not witnessed the transformation himself, Archer would never have guessed these creatures had ever been human. Their faces were gone. Their bodies were lumpy, and their skin was rough and leathery. Their fingers and toes had lengthened, sprouted teeth-like formations, and their mandibles dripped a gooey substance. Archer didn't believe it was possible they would ever go back to normal. Terrified, Archer knew he had to run, but the human bees were clearly faster and more powerful than he was. Archer punched the bellow, pointing the nozzle at the monsters, coating them in a thick plume of smoke. Their buzzing turned into a shriek, the sound of a violin being scraped laterally by its bow. Archer fell backwards as he tried to get away, and the smoker went flying. As it clattered to the floor, the lid popped open and the fuel tumbled out. The lit embers landed on a pile of collapsed cardboard boxes and old newspaper that immediately caught on fire. The room began to fill with smoke and fire. The bees that had covered the walls became agitated, flew from their resting places and buzzed around the room, pelting Archer on all sides. Instinctively, Archer put up an arm to cover his eyes, but then remembered he didn't need to. He was wearing the protective veil. Still, between the smoke and the bees, Archer could hardly see. Rolling onto all fours, he did his best to scamper to the stairs. The oversized outfit made it difficult, but he made it. He began bear crawling up the stairs, one by one, until he felt something tug on his foot. Looking backwards caused the helmet to slide down over one eye, but he caught a glimpse of the problem. One of the monsters had his ankle in its mandible. Archer wailed as he wagged his foot back and forth. He kicked the monster in the maw, and it let go. Archer climbed the rest of the stairs like a ladder as bees whizzed past him, anxious to get away from the burning cellar. Archer tripped and stumbled through the thickening swarm on his way through the kitchen. He felt and heard heavy thuds behind him as he went, as the monster slammed into the walls and ceiling, following him through the house. Archer launched himself out the back door, somersaulted down the steps, and landed in a heap on the ground. He rolled over and over again through the yard, trying to distance himself from the house. Smoke and bees poured from the windows. Behind him, the monsters were trapped, stuck in the doorway, too large to both fly through at once. Their mandibles angrily chomped at the air as they tried to push themselves out. Archer lifted himself up onto his knees, then onto his feet. He yanked the veil from his head, pulled the gloves off of his hands, hastily unzipped the suit, and fell backwards, trying to take it off. He landed on something warm and lumpy. He yelped. "Archer, it's me," Mabel cried. She helped him get the rest of the suit off and dragged him further out into the grass. From their spot in the yard, they watched the monsters burst through the doorway. Splinters of wood exploded onto the lawn. Flames lapped at the air as soon as the creatures were free. The entire first floor was ablaze. The monsters headed straight for Archer and Mabel, and Archer thought for sure they were goners when, just as the creatures were about to land on top of them, enormous wings unfolded from their backs, and they took flight, soaring up into the sky and out over the pines, where they could no longer be seen. "Let's go!" Mabel yelled. They ran into the street, but Archer stopped to take one last look. The fire crackled within, heat rising until the windows exploded and the roof went up in flames. Archer scanned the area. Where were the neighbors? Why wasn't anyone coming to their rescue, or even just to see what was going on? There was only one other person out in the open. Just down the street, her car parked in front of the red house with the yellow door, stood Molly Maplethorpe with a "for sale" sign in her hands. She seemed unperturbed by the fire. She was scowling directly at Archer. Archer was utterly confounded. "Hey, isn't that Twyla's house?" "We have to get out of here," Mabel insisted. She grabbed Archer by the wrist and yanked. As the teens ran off, Molly Mapplethorpe walked up the lawn and jabbed the for sale sign into the dead grass in front of 123 Spite Lane. When she looked up, the teenagers were gone. The Timberlake house continued to burn.